So I think I'm more curious about the comments I'll be getting for this review more than any of the other Godzilla movies that I've reviewed. Godzilla vs. SpaceGodzilla is the 6th film in the Heisei Godzilla era, which, if you want a more easy way to pronounce this era, just call it the Versus era, because with the exception of The Return of Godzilla, each movie is Godzilla versus ... By the way, this movie came out in 1994 and picks up a year after Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2. G-Force has 2 projects now that are used to go up against Godzilla, one of which is called Project M.O.G.U.E.R.A, which is pretty much their successor to Mechagodzilla, a giant penguin-looking robot that's named M.O.G.U.E.R.A, which translates to Mobile Operations G-Force Universal Expert Robot Aerotype. I'm pretty sure that sounds a lot cooler in Japanese. Just like Mechagodzilla, this design is used to fight off against Godzilla and defend the nation. The other project going on is called Project T, which is supposed to take control over Godzilla using telepathy, and Miki Seguza is part of this experiment. At first, she's very reluctant to join Project T because she just kind of wants to let Godzilla live in peace. I mean, he has a son now, he lives in the ocean, there's no real reason for him to come to Japan now. Hell, even in the Showa era, once Godzilla became a father, he had no reason to go to Japan. But she suddenly agrees to join the project when the Mothra fairies come back to Earth and warn her about a space monster heading to Earth with the sole goal of killing Godzilla. So she figures that if she signs on to Project T, she could possibly control Godzilla to fight off this giant monster that eventually arrives to Earth and looks very similar to Godzilla. The monster is suddenly given the name SpaceGodzilla after the most ridiculous scientific explanation for a monster's origin I may have ever seen in a movie. And soon it turns the city of Fukuoka into its own fortress with crystals everywhere. And this happens sometime after SpaceGodzilla comes to Earth, kidnaps little Godzilla, and traps him in a crystal prison. So now Godzilla is seeking to destroy SpaceGodzilla for revenge, and G-Force assigns M.O.G.U.E.R.A to go after SpaceGodzilla to pretty much save not only Japan, but the entire world. With Godzilla vs. Mothra, it was a movie that a lot of Godzilla fans liked, but I just didn't get it. SpaceGodzilla is the opposite. It's a movie that gets mixed reception at best. There are a lot of people that say it's terrible, and honestly, I don't get it either. I can see some problems with this movie that would lead to people saying it is terrible, but there are obviously worse Godzilla movies out there. This is not even among the top 5 of worst Godzilla movies made. Let's go over the problems first of all, because this movie is heavily flawed, no question about it. The first problem is Godzilla's son. I did enjoy the look for baby Godzilla in Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2, even though he had that look of being shit-faced. He was just a small dinosaur, wasn't hurting anyone, but now in this movie they made him a lot cuter, and pretty much he's the 90s version of Minya from the original series. I'm just not on board with the idea of making Godzilla's son look all cute and innocent and have those giant pug-like eyes. I mean, those eyes were great for pugs, as someone who has a pug himself, but on the son of the king of the monsters? Hell no. No, 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 no. I don't understand why they decided to make Godzilla's son all cute and innocent-like. And it just doesn't mix well with the realistic look that all of these monsters have had. It's the equivalent to the Dorats in Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, where it just looks incredibly out of place for a series where you have monster designs that look a little more realistic than their Showa counterparts. Thankfully, he's not in the movie very long. He pops up here and there on occasion, and then when he gets entrapped by a giant crystal prison created by SpaceGodzilla, he disappears until the very end of the movie once Godzilla kills SpaceGodzilla. Another issue that I have is with the special effects. There are a lot of moments in this movie that look great, given that it's a guy in a suit and miniature cities. But this is the part in the 90s series where the special effects are really starting to slag. There are 3 moments that really stick out to me. The most infamous one is the static asteroid field fight scene between M.O.G.U.E.R.A and SpaceGodzilla. Guys, Empire Strikes Back came out in 1980, 14 years before this movie, and the asteroid field sequence in Empire Strikes Back was exciting. It put you on the edge of your seat. The asteroids really looked like a danger because they were moving all over the place through space, taking out TIE fighters. It is one of the most iconic space battles in any movie, not just Star Wars. So for Toho to make Godzilla vs. SpaceGodzilla in 1994 and have a static asteroid field where the asteroids don't move at all, it's not exciting. It would have been so cool if M.O.G.U.E.R.A had to maneuver around the asteroids to try to fight off SpaceGodzilla, and it would have been really cool if SpaceGodzilla uses his telekinetic powers to just move the asteroids out of the way. This was a big criticism that I had even when I reviewed the movie 5 years ago. But upon doing more research and watching this movie again, I do have a slight defense for why this special effects scene is the way it is. I'm not going to excuse the asteroids for being motionless, but it should be noted that starting in 1991, Toho was making a Godzilla movie every year. And production for this particular movie started in June of 1994, and this movie came out in December of the same year. And that's something you could say for a lot of the special effects throughout the rest of the Godzilla movies in the 90s, and even in the Millennium series, is that they were really on a time crunch. They had about 6 months to make the movie, so there was a lot of kinks that they couldn't really work out. Again, when you compare this sequence to the one in Empire Strikes Back, it is rather sad. Another moment in special effects that just doesn't work is a point when Godzilla goes underwater. Godzilla's tail comes out of the ocean and then does this motion, and part of the tail starts to fall off. It's very brief, so I don't know if many people will even catch it, and I do have another explanation for this being what it is. When you watch all the movies from Godzilla vs. Mothra to this, you'll notice that when Godzilla's in the water, they'll use whatever the previous suit used in the last movie was, because the suits did tend to swell up a lot, so I imagine that they'd want the newer suits to stay on dry land. So I can kinda let that go, and again, it's a moment that I imagine many mainstream audience members wouldn't even catch. But the one special effects goof that really bugs me is when M.O.G.U.E.R.A enters Fukuoka to fight SpaceGodzilla. When M.O.G.U.E.R.A is shooting his eye lasers at SpaceGodzilla, there's a point where you can see a plastic bag falling from the sky as SpaceGodzilla is taking the abuse. It happens right as M.O.G.U.E.R.A is attacking SpaceGodzilla from behind, and I never noticed this until I picked up the Blu-ray 4 years ago. And the second you have something like a paper bag falling from the sky during a scene where these guys in rubber suits are supposed to be giant monsters, the illusion's broken. It's done. It takes you out of the movie, and I can never unsee it now. And if you never noticed it beforehand, I'm sorry if I ruined it, but it is something that really breaks the illusion of these being giant monsters. Now, I know the characters throughout this entire second series are not that memorable, so I'm just going to sound like a broken record if I say, oh, the characters are not that memorable, which, yeah, they aren't. But one character in particular that has some potential is Yuki. This character has been living on Bass Island for a long time, which is the island that Little Godzilla and Godzilla live on. And he has a personal vendetta against Godzilla because his best friend, a colonel in Godzilla vs. Biollante, was killed by Godzilla during an operation in Osaka. So he's had this super long grudge against Godzilla, and his big master plan of killing Godzilla is to create a bullet with blood coagulant in it, shoot it in Godzilla's armpit, and that will stop Godzilla's flow of blood and kill him. Really, guy? You've seen Godzilla, right? You know, if you have a grudge against the King of the Monsters, then clearly you must have studied him throughout the years. And you must have known that he can survive missiles, he can survive tank mortars, he can survive maser cannon blasts. He survived the Super X and Super X2. He's fought up against other giant monsters, and he survived molten lava. One time, he swam through lava flow and into Mount Fuji. The second time, he was stuck in a volcano for 5 years. So you really think a bullet the size of a KFC spork is gonna stop the King of the Monsters? Sorry, I was rewatching Deadpool not too long ago, so the KFC spork thing just came up to my mind. But yeah, it's a dumb concept, and there's actually another character in this movie who's the sister of the colonel that got killed in Biollante. And rather than having a grudge, she kind of has this attitude of, well, he knew the job was dangerous when he took it. She doesn't really care all that much. I mean, now granted, the movie takes place 5 years after Godzilla vs. Biollante. So 5 years seems to be enough time to forget about it, but it's... I don't know. Again, bottom line, the characters aren't that great. Now let's get into stuff that I do like, because overall, I think it's a good movie, but yeah, not one of the greats at all. It's better than Godzilla vs. Mothra, but I think this might be the second weakest movie in the second series. The one thing I really like is SpaceGodzilla. His origin is rather ridiculous, and the name SpaceGodzilla is just stupid. It's less cool than the original name, which was AstroGodzilla, which sounds more like something out of Astro Boy than Godzilla, but whatever. The origin of SpaceGodzilla is that Godzilla cells went up into outer space, either when Biollante dissolved and went to outer space, or particles of Godzilla's flesh were attached to Mothra as she went to outer space. Then the cells went into a black hole. I think they came out of a white hole, they were shot up by shooting stars, and then that's how SpaceGodzilla was created. And what I love about it is that the character giving this explanation caps it all off by saying, that's the theory. And in any other movie, everyone sitting in the boardroom would have been like, questions, but instead they're like, okay, so how do we defeat it? So it's just rather amusing. But getting back to the positives of SpaceGodzilla, I love the design. It looks really menacing, and SpaceGodzilla is really what makes this movie for me. He's the first monster in a while to really give me that apocalyptic feel, like SpaceGodzilla is really going to be the end of the world. Because when he arrives in Fukuoka, he turns the entire city into a wasteland, with crystals everywhere. It's pretty much turned into his home, and he's used the tallest building in Fukuoka, the tower, as his source of power, where he draws all of his energy. So SpaceGodzilla really is a menace, and in his first fight with Godzilla, he kicks Godzilla's ass. SpaceGodzilla is not one to be messed with. And his theme song is rather threatening as well. The music this time around is not done by Akira Ifukube, but instead by Takayuki Hattori, who would later on go do Godzilla 2000, and he's scoring the Godzilla anime trilogy. The score itself isn't that memorable, it's often forgettable, but the SpaceGodzilla theme and the M.O.G.U.E.R.A theme really stick out to me. The SpaceGodzilla theme is just truly menacing, and just gives you that sense of dread. And the M.O.G.U.E.R.A theme is just downright heroic. And speaking of M.O.G.U.E.R.A, this is the first time this character has been in a Godzilla movie, because he was originally an alien war machine in The Mysterians from 1957, which I've already reviewed before. M.O.G.U.E.R.A is not as cool as Mechagodzilla, I'll admit, but in terms of the design and context within the film's universe, I think it's more effective than Mechagodzilla, because M.O.G.U.E.R.A has a smaller crew of 3 people, and it can split into 2 parts, which was actually an original concept for Mechagodzilla, when Mechagodzilla used to look like this rather than this. And that makes M.O.G.U.E.R.A a little bit of a force to be reckoned with when fighting SpaceGodzilla, even though, again, Mechagodzilla is still cooler, but M.O.G.U.E.R.A holds a special place in my heart because it was one of the first 2 Godzilla toys that me and my brother ever got, and I still have them. The second was the 1954 Godzilla. M.O.G.U.E.R.A actually belonged to my little brother, but somehow it just morphed into my Godzilla collection, so M.O.G.U.E.R.A is kind of special, and Godzilla vs. SpaceGodzilla actually used to be my brother's favorite Godzilla movie until we grew older, so I think now it's probably Shin Godzilla for him. But yeah, M.O.G.U.E.R.A's fun. The final battle is where the movie really kicks in. This is where I really enjoy the movie a lot. And one thing that places this above Godzilla vs. Mothra for me is that even though the characters aren't particularly interesting, they're a part of the action. Your main characters are the crew of M.O.G.U.E.R.A. They're actually in the heat of battle fighting SpaceGodzilla and fighting alongside Godzilla to save the world. This right here is the closest the second Godzilla series ever got to replicating something in the original era, where Godzilla had to team up with humanity to rid the world of an invading force. So overall, it's an enjoyable Godzilla movie. It is flawed as hell, no question about it, and I will not defend this movie from anyone who absolutely hates it, because there are a lot of valid criticisms in this movie, but ultimately the last half of the movie is what makes it for me. So yeah, it's good in my opinion, but it's nowhere nowhere close to being great at all. But I still enjoyed this more than Godzilla vs. Mothra, though I will say this movie actually made Godzilla vs. Mothra feel like it has a purpose within this second series, because it does bring in characters and plot elements from that last movie. And that's my review for Godzilla vs. SpaceGodzilla. Tomorrow is going to be the final film in the second Godzilla series, Godzilla vs. Destoroyah. I'm not even going to say that monster's name like James Rolfe. Everybody on YouTube tries to mimic James Rolfe whenever they say Destoroyah, so I'm not going to do that. So until tomorrow, I hope you enjoyed this review. Leave a comment down below and tell me what your thoughts are on the movie, if and when you've seen it. And as always, this is the real Mr. Robinson telling you there's only one.